Hello, researchers. My name is Andrew Sullivan. I'm the Environmental Health and Safety Coordinator for the Office of Environmental Health and Safety at UMass Dartmouth. Today we're going to go through our hazardous waste training. I just want to let you know about our environmental management system called CHEMS. So CHEMS is used to access trainings. It's used for our chemical inventory system. And it's also used to review safety data sheets. So it's a really great system. It's free to all users on campus. And what's really great about it is it gives researchers a centralized database to track, input, update all chemicals that we have on campus and attach them to their own research lab. So, not only does it make sure that you maintain compliance with EHS regulations, but it also helps you keep track of your own inventory and chemicals that you have in your lab. Let's take a moment to review the picture and see if you can come up with any questions or concerns that you have with some of the practices that are going on. Okay, so just in case you weren't able to find all of the issues in the picture, I'll go through some of the compliance concerns that we have. So first off, the chemical potassium permanganate, or the chemical bottle labeled KMNO4, it reacts violently with iodine. So you can see there's a bottle of iodine in the back on top of that tray. So that would be a EHS lab safety related concern. In addition, you can see a lot of these chemical containers aren't labeled at all. So that's another issue. Not only these are the shortened names or the chemical acronyms for the containers, we also want to make sure that we have the full names of the chemicals written on the bottle. So having no labels at all is even worse. So we really want to make sure that we have the full chemical names of the materials on the actual containers. In addition, there's some scattered sharps on top of the counter here in the lab bench. So that's a concern. Sharps should be placed in a certified sharps container for disposal. You're here because anyone who's involved in the management or generation of hazardous waste using hazardous chemicals in a research laboratory must take this course within 6 months of starting in your research lab or full-time employment at UMass Dartmouth. In addition, you'll need to take this course again as an annual refresher. So it's really important that you're staying on top of your hazardous waste training. So not there are various regulations that we need to follow in the hazardous waste program. So to protect the environment and the health of Americans, there's various regulatory agencies who maintain rules and regulations in regards to the management of disposal of hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is regulated by both the EPA and under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, specifically in the EPA regulations. And there's also the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, 310 CMR 30, which basically is for all hazardous waste generators in the state of Massachusetts. They need to follow that regulation. And then finally, the U.S. Department of Transportation, or the DOT, they regulate the shipment or the transit and traveling of hazardous materials, including hazardous waste, across the United States. So Both the Department of Environmental Protection and the EPA state that we must manage our hazardous waste from cradle to grave, which means we're responsible for hazardous waste that we generate until it reaches its final disposal. It's important that you also take the laboratory safety training via the city training platform, which we also have. So to find out more information on that, you can check the UMass Dartmouth website. The city lab safety training is really fantastic. Teaches you all sorts of great information on how to work safely with hazardous chemicals in the laboratory. But another important aspect of the training course is it gives you information about how to access and read safety data sheets. And so safety data sheets are a great tool for helping you make hazardous waste determinations. So from safety data sheets, you can find things like the flash point, the pH or corrosivity data, or if your chemical is reactive. So the toxic, in addition to that, to determine if you have a toxic waste, you need to check with the table that we have posted on our website. And this is determined by basically screening to see if your chemical is on a list of toxic hazardous waste set by the EPA. This is a snapshot of a safety data sheet for a chemical called trichlorosilane. And to determine if you have a ignitable hazardous waste, the information that you need to find is the flash point. So if you have a chemical like trichlorosilane, for example, you can see that the flash point is listed as 7 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you were to look back at the previous slide, we know that a hazardous waste for ignitability is anything that's under 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything that's a strong acid or a strong base, 13 being a very strong base, above 12, or anything of 2 or below would be considered a corrosive waste. It's important to know that for reactive type hazardous waste, you want to look for certain keywords like if it's stable or unstable, or sometimes safety data sheets will just say that it's reactive. So that information is enough that you need to know to make a determination to know that you have a reactive hazardous waste. And here's an example of that toxic waste table I was talking about earlier. So basically what you want to do is just check the name of your chemical. So for example, if you have waste arsenic from your laboratory and it's on the list posted on our website, then you'll know that you'll need to manage and label your arsenic waste as a hazardous waste. And EPA lists that are available to specify different hazard designations, but the important part is to understand that you should always assume that your lab products are hazardous before treating them as though they are not. All right, so now that you understand how to make a hazardous waste determination, let's go over how to label your hazardous waste. Labels must be placed on hazardous waste containers as soon as you add hazardous waste to the container itself. You need to fill out all the fields on the hazardous waste label, and you need to fill out the date section of the label when the container becomes full, or if you no longer need that chemical and you need to still fill out that section to make sure that it's picked up by Triumvirate Environmental, our hazardous waste vendor. And it's really important to make sure that all of your handwriting is legible and all the fields are filled out on the container label itself, so we're exactly aware of what's inside of the container. If you can do your best to fill out a percentage of the different types of waste that are accounted for in your waste mixture, it doesn't need to be perfect. How should you date the label, and what date does the bottle need to be removed by? So, you should date the bottle the day that it is full. However, the waste stream needs to be removed from within 3 days. Your hazardous waste can't just go into any container. It needs to go in one of these approved containers by EH&S. So if you have any solid hazardous waste, it can go into a 1 liter mayo jar type container. So an example of what you put in this is contaminated PPE. So gloves that have physical staining of like a solvent or something like that should be collected in a solid hazardous waste container. In addition, any chemical sharps, so sharps that are contaminated with hazardous chemicals, should be collected and managed in the sharps container. And then any liquids, you can use either a glass or a plastic bottle to collect your liquid waste. One thing that's important is just to make sure that your compatibility is, your chemical compatibility is okay for these containers. So for example, in addition, we also have a 5-gallon carboy container, which can be used for both liquids and solids. And it's important to remember that your containers must remain tightly closed, except when you're adding waste. Now what I'd like everyone to do is to use a chemical that you commonly use in the laboratory and take some time to fill out a hazardous waste label and practice this on your own. So what kind of hazardous waste is this? So, so for all the information that we know so far, let's take some time to look through this. So this is the chemical information that's important that was taken from a safety data sheet. So here's the name of the chemical, it's nitric acid. the pH is 1, there is no flash point, stability says it's an oxidizer, it reacts violently with alcohol, etc., and it's not on the RCRA-TCLIP list. So remember, that is the toxic waste list. So if you were to make a waste determination for this chemical, nitric acid, how would you choose how to label it? So the answer is C, corrosive hazardous waste, because the pH is 1, which is less than 2. So now we've learned about how to make a waste determination and how to label your hazardous waste. So the next important part of our training is to understand where to store it in the laboratory. So the hazardous waste satellite accumulation area needs to be set up to accumulate your waste while it's in storage. So this posting should be located at the area where you're actually physically accumulating and generating hazardous waste in the laboratory. There's some rules that we need to follow when it comes to our satellite accumulation area. So secondary containment bins or tubs are required for all liquid wastes. You need to inspect your satellite accumulation area weekly for deterioration or leaks, and they need to be repaired as necessary. Your satellite accumulation area must be under the control of the supervisor or the waste generator. Storage of hazardous waste cannot exceed 55 gallons or 1 large drum of hazardous waste or 1 quart of acutely hazardous waste. Satellite accumulation areas must be at or near the point of generation. So you need to make sure that you set this area up in your research lab close to where you generate your hazardous waste. You're only allowed to have 1 container per waste stream generated at any one time. Here's an example of what a satellite accumulation area could look like in your laboratory. And pay for Triumvirate Environmental to be on campus. And like I mentioned previously in the training, our technicians are on campus every Tuesday and Wednesday. When I say that, every Tuesday they're on the main campus, and then on Wednesdays they're at our satellite campuses, so either Star Store, CRE, or SMAS. Triumvirate Environmental will visit your labs and pick up waste from your satellite accumulation areas, and they'll also drop off supplies upon request. So it's important for you to know that they will not pick up your waste if your containers are not labeled, or if your lids are not on your containers, or if you don't have a satellite accumulation area set up in your laboratory. If you need help with setting up a hazardous waste program in general in your lab, please reach out to us or Triumvirate when they come to visit, and we'll help you get set up in the right direction. If you have any special waste requests, you can always contact Environmental Health and Safety, but like I mentioned before, they will visit your lab on Tuesday or Wednesday when they're on campus each week. They're required to go to every single lab on campus. Certain chemicals that you're not using anymore, you can also trade them or share them with other laboratories on campus instead of using them or managing them as a hazardous waste. So by doing that, it's really great because it protects you and also the environment, so we're not then disposing of that chemical. It saves you money and the university money for waste disposal costs. Another way that we can reduce the waste that we have on campus is to learn about safer substitutes or alternatives. So if you can accomplish the same goal as your research by using a safer chemical instead of a chemical that's hazardous, we recommend that you do that. By doing that, it decreases your potential exposure to a hazardous material. And by looking through this, you can also help modernize your procedures when it comes to doing and conducting research in the laboratory. And you can search for chemicals and chems, like I mentioned earlier, And you can use that as your main platform to reach out to PIs or other researchers and share chemicals as needed. You want to make sure that you fully cover or deface the label before getting rid of it as trash. It needs to be obvious that the original material is not inside the container. Ever generated an unknown waste in the lab before, it's important that you know that it's very expensive for us to manage unknown waste. We have to pay a trained chemist to test our unknowns, and it can cost the university and your research lab directly a lot of money. So it's really important that you take the information that you learned as part of this training and label your chemicals while they're in use in the research laboratory. Many things that are wrong, but the two main things I want to point out is that these 5-gallon carboys, they're not in secondary containment and they're filled with liquids. And this one here, it doesn't have a lid. So it's important to remember that if you have any liquids, they should be stored in secondary containment, and all of your chemical containers, whether they're waste or just a chemical you're actively using as part of your research, they need to be closed tightly and stored in appropriate locations at all times. This chemical container here just says waste on it. That's not appropriate. It needs to have our UMass Dartmouth hazardous waste label on it, as well as all the information that's required for hazardous waste labeling. This 5-gallon cardboard container doesn't have any labels on it at all, and neither do these containers. So we don't know if these containers are waste or if they're being used for some type of experiment. So that's why the chemical labeling really needs to be improved here in this picture. Review the chemical hygiene plan for cleanup procedures. And if there is an emergency situation, be available to report information to emergency personnel, and always keep a safe distance. Please follow the techniques as laid out in the slide to don and doff your gloves. Visit us at www.umassd.edu/environmental health safety to find lots of great information about all of our programs that we offer to you.